What's up, guys? Welcome into another edition of Bogey Free. We are coming at you this week with some NFL Week 11 action. And Steve Halupka is making his triumphant return back to the broadcast booth with me. Steve, what's going on, man? How we doing?
Feeling good, man. Yeah, I was out in Cali last week for some non-DFS fun for my actual job. So now back in the saddle and ready to talk some fantasy football.
There you go. And quite a treat tonight. We have Josh coming on with us. You know him as Fantasy ADHD. If you are not going to his site, fantasyadhd.com, or following him on Twitter, you're probably paying the rake every week. Josh, thanks a lot for coming on with us. How's it going tonight, man?
Things are going great. I got a little football on TV. That's good. I haven't been able to watch as much as I like to lately, but we're living it up right now. Otherwise, things are great. Busy, super busy right now, getting ready for the Roto Grinders live final party this weekend, and just enjoying things.
Awesome. So before we jump in, I do have to just make my my little mea culpa about this past week. So for whatever reason, I'm just a fucking idiot, and I somehow made the listener league a 50-50 this past week. So I mentioned it on the golf pod this week as well, but if you don't listen to the golf, you can just listen to NFL. If you're in the top 5, just shoot me a DM on Twitter at MattJonesTFR, and I'll hook you up with a bogey-free hat, because that was a complete disaster on my end. I don't even know how that happened. I don't know. It was a rough weekend. I was busy. We're doing some Jones Beach Brewing stuff. We had a tasting party on Sunday. I had a sweat for a King of the Beach ticket that Selleck touchdown knocked me out of. And I've been running extremely, extremely cold. So hopefully we can get some insight from you two guys, because I'm clearly the donkey on here. So hopefully we can get me on some good plays and get me out of this bad luck that I've been having. So we're not even going to go through the lineups. BP Schwartz would have won. It was a low scoring week. It was 153 for the listener league this week, but overall scores were down. So why don't we dive right into it? We can start up at the top with some quarterback action. Steve, I'll kick it to you first. What are the cash locks this week for quarterback? Who are we looking at?
I mean, I think we get to start right at the top with Tom Brady, man. I mean, just total cake matchup playing Oakland, 32nd ranked pass DVOA defense in the Raiders. Obviously, he is the most expensive quarterback on the main slate at 7,400. But, I mean, you talk about a total just great spot for someone. I mean, Brady's just been smashing people right and left, even playing real well against the Broncos last week as well. So this spot against Oakland, who's a terrible pass defense, they haven't been able to rush the passer this year either. I'm loving him at 74. And the rest of the top of the slate as well, they're looking good. I mean, Breeze at home as a big favorite against the Redskins, who just got torched by Case Keenum of all people. I mean, that's looking good. And then Alex Smith, too, playing against our hapless Giants. It's just the top of this slate's looking real good if you're paying up in cash. I'm a fan of all three plays.
Absolutely. And just a quick note, if you haven't really looked through salaries yet, there's only four guys above 8K on the main slate. So it's not like we don't have the Le'Veon Bell or the Antonio Brown at 9,500 that we really need the savings as much. And I do think there's some value opening up this week. So hopefully we can pay up for some of these quarterbacks with these great matchups. Josh, if you had to pick your favorite out of those sort of top 3 guys, who are you leaning towards?
Oh, it's absolutely Brady. He's the only guy I trust in this spot right now. If I'm going to pay up for quarterback, I'm going to go with the guy that I know is pretty much going to throw the ball 40 times. We already talked about the matchup that he has with Oakland. It's a fantastic matchup. I heard CJ Kaltenbach, the Siege, talking earlier this week about how both teams were getting prepped. So the Patriots have been prepping in Denver, been practicing at altitude, and Oakland's been practicing at home at sea level. And so they're going to go play in Mexico City at 7,000 something feet. And I just don't see how Oakland's going to be able to stay up with them just from a conditioning standpoint. So that in hand, knowing what the Patriots can do to a defense with their schemes and knowing how Brady is, he's a nuts play for me right now. I can't get away from him if I'm paying up.
Yeah, I can definitely get on board with that. I think what they were practicing at the Air Force Academy or something, and they just stayed out there after the Denver game. So obviously two different approaches. So I guess we'll see how that works out for both teams this week. But I guess sticking with that game, Steve, do you have any love for Derek Carr at all? I mean, it's not like New England has really been doing an impression of the 85 Bears this year.
No, you're totally right with that. I mean, Carr at 6,400 obviously is going to save you a little bit from Brady, Breeze, and Smith. It's a 53.5 over under right now in this game, so it's a huge total, highest on the slate. And then both his weapons, big weapons, Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. I think we'll probably talk about them later at wide receiver. But yeah, I mean, if you're trying to save a buck here and there, if you want to fit into one of those higher price guys in your lineup, I would not be opposed to Derek Carr either.
Josh, how about my boy Goff Goat? Do we have any love for him, or is Minnesota scaring you off?
I've got a lot of love for Goff this week. Now, his price is starting to creep up to where when he plays a team like Minnesota, you think about it for just a minute. Like, do I want to pay $6,500 for him against what I know is a pretty tough pass defense? But obviously what we see with that offense is they have an excellent coach, a super sharp guy that can probably scheme that offense up against even a tough pass defense like Minnesota and get a lot of production out of the pass game. So I expect that they'll have a lot of tricks up their sleeve this week, and Goff will have a relatively productive week. I don't think he's going to throw for 300, but he could go out there and get, let's say, 270 and 2 scores. And I think for 6,500, you would certainly take that.
Absolutely. Any super cheap? I mean, I guess we have to talk about the. Not that I think it's an excellent spot by any means, but we should mention Tyrod Taylor was benched during the week, and it looks like the good old Nathan Peterman is going to be making his first start. He's down at 4,700. I mean, he showed some reasonable flashes in the preseason. Steve, are you going with him if you're paying all the way down? Are you going maybe a little Gabbert here? Like, what are we thinking?
Oh, they're both gross. I mean, Gabbert's got the better matchup against Houston. Houston's pass defense, as we've seen recently, just being torched right and left. But yeah, I mean, Nathan Peterman playing against the Chargers. The Chargers pass rush has been just dirty this year. Joey Bosa has been a monster. That offensive line has gotten manhandled the last couple of weeks. I mean, the Jets beat them up, and they've been beat up in other games as well. I'm all out on Buffalo, especially playing on the West Coast. Just totally off Nathan Peterman and any Buffalo skill player this week.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Josh? Are there any other like cheaper GPP quarterbacks you're considering?
It's not even GPP. I'll consider these guys for cash. Typically my cash lineup, I've got a bottom of the barrel quarterback because I feel like I can pick out the cheap quarterback that can get me, let's say, 15 to 20 points. And just totally give me enough cash to do a lot of things at other positions. And I see probably 3 guys at the bottom that can do that this week. One's Gabbert, and I think Gabbert's that. And I'm going to say this because the quarterbacks I'm seeking at this level they're running quarterbacks. They can go out and get extra points with their feet. So that's Gabbert. That's Brett Hundley. Even though Brett Hundley's in kind of an ugly matchup, I think he can get enough with his feet to make up for some of the passing that may be lacking in his game. And then I'd also be looking at, as just a total YOLO play, like Deshaun Kaiser. Kaiser looked good last week against a relatively tough Detroit team. And he made some throws that he hadn't been making earlier in the season. So there's a little bit of a glimmer of hope that maybe he's starting to trend up a little bit. We already know he's mobile enough that he can get, let's say, 5 to 10 points with his feet on a weekly basis if he gets a touchdown or not. So for 4,500, I think as a tournament play, you might look at Kaiser a little bit. Now, granted, the weather looks like it's going to suck in Cleveland this weekend, so that'll probably actually put a lot of people off of this game as if they weren't already going to be off Kaiser. So Kaiser's probably a guy that you could get at 0.5% of ownership as a tournament play, where if he for some reason blows up for 20 to 25 points, I think it gives you a lot of leverage on the field. One other quarterback I am looking at here is Peterman a little bit. And we talked about Peterman as a guy that is like he's toxic right now just because of the situation he's walking into. But I would take a little bit of a contrarian approach here. And, we mentioned that he's had some flashes in the preseason. That's true. Now, we also know that Buffalo planned their offense for Tyrod Taylor to fail. But that doesn't mean that it's going to make Nathan Peterman fail. So if the offense is really structured for Peterman to succeed, and we think they're going to be playing from behind for the majority of the game, then I think there's an opportunity here for Peterman to rack up a lot of garbage time statistics. And granted, it's the Chargers are a tough defense, but if they're giving him enough in the short passing game to where he can get, let's say, to 250 and 2 touchdowns and maybe get a little bit with his feet, I think at 4,700 you would certainly take that. So as a tournament play, he might be worth sprinkling in at a low percentage. I wouldn't play him in my cash lineups because I'm probably going to have the Chargers as my primary defense in cash lineups. But I think he's certainly worth at least to think about it a little bit just because of the situation and not totally wash your hands of it just because of how they treated Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. And your Kaiser take just struck a chord with me because he was in my lineup last week. I'm not going to keep harping on it. I had Kaiser and Duke Johnson together, and it was glorious for a little while there. But anyway, Steve, you got anybody else we're missing, or you think we're good on QBs?
Yeah, I had one more thought, just going back to Fitzmagic at 5,300 against that putrid Miami secondary. He's getting Mike Evans back this week. We know he's going to be peppering him with targets. For what we saw Miami coming off a short week against Carolina. Now, obviously, Fitzmagic is not Cam Newton. We know that for a fact. But if we're talking about a rushing floor as well, Fitz can run the ball. We've seen him scramble around, 20, 30 yards sometimes. And with that Mike Evans upside, just a shot, a couple of GPP lineups with those two in a stack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. You guys kind of hit on everything that I was thinking anyway, so I'm good to move on to running backs. And I guess for running backs, we can start up at the top here again. I mentioned earlier, these are the only 4 players above 8K this week. We have Gurley, Fournette, Ingram, and Hunt. So, are we locking any of these guys in for cash, Josh?
I think you certainly have to look at Gurley and Hunt in this situation just because of their role in their offense. Hunt not as much, but definitely Gurley. This is a 25 to 30 touch guy on a weekly basis, and Gurley gets passing downward. So I think you have to look at him as a cash game play if you're going to pay up for a running back. Fournette, I'm a little bit iffy on just because of how they've handled him the last few weeks. And to me, he's purely a tournament play. Ingram, I love Ingram this week. I don't have any issue playing Ingram. He's expensive now, especially considering the workload split that he gets with Alvin Kamara. But he's still getting the lion's share of the work in that offense. And Kamara he's scoring more touchdowns. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's the better running back or getting more work. He's just turning more touchdowns in. Okay, so Ingram got his share last week. Maybe that continues this week. I don't have a problem with Ingram, but I think Hunt's going to be the chalk this week just because, we find out today that the Giants are going to be without their stud, quote unquote, nose tackle. That's going to allegedly open up more running lanes in that defense. And we think that the Chiefs are going to just slaughter the Giants. So with all of those logical thoughts in mind, then I think that just leads you right back to Hunt as your cash game play.
How about you, Steve? Where are you going up top?
Yeah, I totally agree with that point about Hunt. It's so sad to see what's become of the New York Giants. Their defense was the top 5 squad last year. Now this year, they're just an absolute mess. People are jumping ship right and left. No Snacks Harrison in the middle. It's looking like Hunt's to just run all over these guys throughout the entirety of their game. And totally echo the sentiments, too, with Gurley. He's so an integral part of that offense as a whole. 25 touches we're looking at usually on a week-to-week basis. So, yeah, I'm digging Gurley, too, if you're paying all the way up.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, too. I really feel like Gurley is the play for me. I would love to believe that I can, predict the Giants just because I've watched them for so long. But, I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm like, this is that spot, right, where everybody thinks that it's going to just be a bloodbath. And it really wouldn't surprise me if Hunt failed this week. I think Hill's going to get his. I think Kelsey's going to get his. I would not be shocked if out of these 4 top guys that Hunt ended up being the lowest scorer. I'm not saying that that's like a definite, but I definitely wouldn't. It wouldn't be something that's like outside of the range of outcomes for me.
No, I totally get that vibe. I'm 100% with you, and that's my fear in playing him is he lays an egg, right?
Yep.
And I mean, we've seen it happen with this Chiefs team before. They went out against Dallas and they gave him the ball 9 times in the game, 9 times, and they could totally do that against the Giants this week. It could totally happen. So that's why I have a really hard time going with him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that Marone doesn't still have Fournette grounded for missing the family picture a couple weeks ago, and hopefully we'll get him at some low ownership in a pretty decent matchup, and hopefully they sort of run away with it there. That would be ideal for me. If we are going down sort of like mid-range cash game wise, is there anybody else that's jumping out to you, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I would think about LaShawn McCoy a little bit. I mean, his price has come down slightly. Now, granted, they announced the quarterback change after pricing was set, so it's possible that his pricing might have been knocked down another $500 or $600 if we had known that Peterman was going to be starting before they set pricing. But I'll consider him. I'd consider him over Hunt probably, just because of the workload that I know these guys are going to get. Gordon, I think Gordon's definitely in play this week. He's a bad football player, but he's good at fantasy.
So bad.
So, and we think the workload will be there just because of the game script. Kamara, I think Kamara is definitely a consideration again, just because, he's got a pretty solid role, and we think New Orleans will be ahead in that game. I think Jordan Howard is going to be a good play this week, just because folks are going to be off of him after getting shelled by Howard last week. And I was one of those guys. I had Howard in some lineups, and he totally laid an egg on me too. But we have some experience with having eggs laid on our lineups and going back to next week and kind of getting our heads right and thinking through the situation and realizing that, okay, it was just variance. It was a bad week and the situation's good again. And Howard could go out and he could get 25 carries for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's going to be fantastic at 6,200. So I think right there in that mid range, I think there's some great plays. And we'll probably talk about McKinnon again in a minute. I don't know if we're going to call him mid-tier or lower tier, but I think all of these guys have some merits, definitely for turning lineups and cash. I'm certainly looking at Gordon and probably even McCoy just a little bit.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm curious your thoughts on. It seemed like sort of the sky was falling, right? Eckler is getting some work, and people are sort of reacting to Gordon not getting like 100% of the running back work there. Do you think that that's going to suppress his ownership? And if you do you think that it's warranted or no?
I think it is going to suppress his ownership, one, because like you said, you saw the 2 big plays from Austin Eckler last week. Do I think it's warranted? Hell no. I mean, Melvin Gordon is still the one of the main cogs in this offense. And to Josh's point before, I mean, the potential positive game script against the Buffalo team who's trotting out a new rookie quarterback for 7,600, I'm on that. So I'm a big fan of Melvin Gordon this week. Buffalo's rush defense, since they've lost Marcel Darius, has not been the same. They are really struggling against the run, and we do know Gordon won't only run the ball, but he will catch passes as well. So I like Gordon a lot for 7,600.
Yeah, I'm on board with that too. I think that you could do a lot worse than going with these 2 guys that have these narratives that are going to drop their ownership with Gordon and Howard, because I was one of those guys that got burnt by Howard last week, thinking that it was just super safe, workload wise and volume wise, and it didn't quite pan out. But I wasn't really thinking of McCoy, but it's you guys are talking me into it now. Are there any super cheap guys? I mean, Josh, you mentioned McKinnon. What are your thoughts there? Are you in on McKinnon this week?
Absolutely. I think McKinnon's probably going to be my number 1 play at the running back position this week, because I think he's a discount against guys like Melvin Gordon, LaShawn McCoy, and even Mark Ingram to some degree. They're going to see similar workloads We know McKinnon gets the passing downs in that offense. And we've also seen him get 30 touches in a game this year. So I think if the game script's working out where they're in a competitive game or even behind a little bit, McKinnon's the guy. And I mean, they're not going to have Murray in there unless they're up by, let's say, 10 plus points and just having him be a sledgehammer at the end of the game or in the second half. Otherwise, I think it's McKinnon. I think this will be a competitive game. A lot of folks are kind of circling this as a shootout game. I don't necessarily know about that because I think both of these offenses are, I don't want to say fraudulent, but I think they are at the end of their distribution so far as performance. I think they're at the top end. They have been all season. And I think it's maybe a little bit of a mirage. And if that's the case, I think McKinnon is going to certainly be the play here in that game. And really as a contrarian play to Gurley, I think they get similar workloads in this game. And I think McKinnon can score as much or if not more than Gurley.
Yeah, and the price drop is obviously a big deal too. Him being at 5,700 this week, he dropped his salary $900 from last week, so that's a huge savings, and that's a big it sort of gives you a little bit more confidence than playing him at up in like the mid 6K range. But if we're talking about that game, Josh, I guess I would like your thoughts too. What are your thoughts on playing running backs in the same game? Would you ever put Gurley and McKinnon into the same lineup, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean, we're talking about loading up running backs from the same team in some situations, right? Like last week, we saw a lot of Kamara and Ingram lineups, and one of the constructions I was tinkering with this week very briefly was Gordon and Eckler in the same lineup. Just from a game script standpoint, it's like, okay, well, let's say LA's up by 4 touchdowns, then they're probably splitting that running back workload, trying to kill the game, and there's some goodness there to be had. So in the same game, if it's a competitive offensive game and the scoring leans toward the rushing side, yeah, I think you could certainly play 2 bell cow backs against one another. I mean, if both teams are getting up in the upper 20s, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scoring to be had there, and it doesn't necessarily have to come through the passing game.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I like that. I think a lot. That's one of those things, along with, say, like stacking a QB and a running back, that people just sort of stray away from blindly and don't always take into consideration like the sort of minor details that can actually make that a solid way to build a lineup. I do want to, Steve, I guess I'll start with you. I do want to get your thoughts on this, like, just complete clusterfuck of New England's running backs. Where are we going? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, no, that was good because I was about to go there and talk about Sexy Rexy Burkhead. I mean, I think he's my favorite out of this group. He's only 3,600. His playing time has gone up the last couple of weeks. We've seen him used in a multitude of ways, split out wide, running the ball. So for 3,600, again, a huge total game at 53.5. New England's a favorite as well. I'm a fan of Rex Burkhead this week.
How about you, Josh?
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Now, one thing I'm going to be watching closely Sunday afternoon is the inactive list. And if they make Mike Gillislee inactive again, let me try that, inactive again, then I will certainly be all over Burkhead. Now, if Gillislee is active for some reason, and they also have Dion Lewis and James White and Burkhead active, all 4 of them, then I may back off a little bit. And Steve brought up a really good point about Burkhead's usage, especially at the flank. He's the only running back on the team that they run out as a wide receiver and let him run wide receiver routes and throw to him as a wide receiver. And to me, that's really critical in differentiating his role in the offense versus James White and versus Dion Lewis, who they're more traditional, I think, running back and how they're used in the offense. So if I'm going to get one guy in this offense, it's probably going to be Burkhead this week just because of his passing down work and his usage as a wide receiver. Otherwise, I'm going to stay away from it, I think.
If it's only the 3 of them active and Gillislee isn't, is he going to warrant any cash consideration for you, or do you think you don't have to go down that cheap?
No, actually, I think you do need to go down this cheap depending on your construction. If you're going to pay up at quarterback and going to do some of the things that we're going to talk about at tight end in a little bit, then I think you have to pay down at running back, maybe at both spots, to make those other lineup variations workable. So Burkhead's going to be kind of a jam play, I think, for a lot of people at his price, just because of the perceived workload that he's going to see. Although I think there are some folks around his price range that we could talk about in a minute that are certainly worth maybe as a pivot off of Burkhead at 3,600.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the fan share tags right now for him, it's Burkhead's getting pretty out of control right now. He has 27 tags right now.
He looked sexy in a primetime game last week. So I mean, he's the cat's meow right now, which is a 1,000% excellent reason to fade him this weekend.
Right. Kamara, Hunt, and Gordon are the only ones at 20 or up at running back right now. So he's definitely going to see his fair share of ownership. But if Josh, I guess we could just go right into it. Who else are you looking at in that range then? I'm interested to hear.
So I'm looking at Andre Ellington. And the reason I'm looking at Ellington is if I think that this is going to be Houston and Arizona is going to be a high scoring game for any reason, and I think it could be, then I think Ellington's going to get enough passing down work to warrant his 3,800 price tag. And really, he only needs, let's say, especially for cash, I mean, he probably needs like 12 points to blow past any kind of expectations. And that's 5 catches for 50 yards and a couple of runs. So I think he's worth a look. Another player I'm looking at in this range, where did he go? Is actually 2 guys. I'm looking at Samaje Perine and I'm looking at Alex Collins. Now, Alex Collins is more of a FanDuel play, typically just because he's a running back that doesn't get many targets in the offense. But I think this particular game against Green Bay, I think he could fall in the end zone 2 times and get, let's say, 14 carries for 80 yards. And that just totally blows up his expectation at his price. So I think he's certainly worth a look as a tournament play just for that reason. And then I was also looking at Mixon as well. Now that they put Jeremy Hill on IR and kind of solidified, for all intents and purposes, that running back situation, Mixon at 4K against Denver is certainly worth a look as a tournament play. Let's say if Cincinnati actually shows up and plays a decent offensive game, I don't have a lot of faith in that, but maybe it's worth a thought in tournaments. So, paying up maybe just a shade more, you might look at, let's say, Amir Abdullah. I think he's worth some consideration. Theo Riddick, definitely a consideration. And probably top of that range for me is going to be Marshawn Lynch.
Steve, any thoughts on some of these bargain basement running backs?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Lynch call. We saw what he could do in a game that's, a little bit back and forth. We saw the 2 touchdown game last time out. And if the game script does not go as everyone's thinking that it will go, if Oakland's right with New England throughout the entirety of this game, there's definitely a good chance for Lynch to, score twice yet again. So I really like that call. I really like C.J. Anderson this week too for just a small, like 1 or 2% in a GPP. I know obviously we've seen the workload split, but that was a lot, I think, due to negative game script for them. We've seen Denver get behind a bunch and have to really throw it. I don't think that's going to be the case here against Cincinnati. And Denver's had a lot of success in the past when they hand C.J. Anderson the ball 15 or more times. So against this Cincinnati team that's struggling on offense, we don't expect Andy Dalton to set the world on fire against this Denver secondary. I think Anderson could get potentially a pretty decent workload here. And for 4K, I mean, he can, again, have a 15 carry at least, 85-yard, and potentially 2 touchdown game here.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, just going back to Josh's thought, that I'm a sucker for Theo Riddick. So you saying that is definitely going to get me on him this week. I also think Mixon is a good call from just sort of a leverage perspective, because Croft is going to be so highly owned this week, which I guess we'll get to later. But that's definitely a consideration as well. If Croft's ownership is going to get out of control, then Mixon, if Mixon scores those 2 touchdowns that could have went to Croft, you're looking at a complete smash play at pretty low ownership. And 4K is basically free, right? I mean, 4K is nothing. The last guy that I did just want to, I guess, sort of get your thoughts on would be Jamal Williams. Obviously, the backfield in Green Bay right now is sort of a disaster. It seems like anybody who takes a snap gets hurt back there. at 4,900. Josh, do you have any interest in Williams, or is that just a total avoid?
Yeah, to me, I'm going to avoid that situation altogether. I think that's just with the injuries now, I think that's just a totally ugly, murky backfield. I mean, we saw Randall Cobb taking handoffs last week and basically playing Ty Montgomery Jr. And it's just, it's ugly. Yeah, like if I want somebody running in that offense, I want Hundley. Right. Because he's also going to get the passing offense to go with it. But there's a player that's a few $100 cheaper than that a few people have talked about this week. His name is totally down in the mud right now, and that's Doug Martin, who finally might get to play a game with a positive game script. And we know that Tampa Bay, when they have a lead, will run the hell out of the ball. Mm-hmm. And that's Doug Martin's job. Now, they haven't had any leads this year. They've been getting their asses kicked. But here's a game where they could have a lead against a crappy Miami team and give him, let's say, 20 touches total in the game. You know, they're going to give Sims some work. But at 4,500, if you can get 20 touches at 4,500, that's awesome. Even if he only turns it into, let's say, 70 yards and maybe a score, I think that's pretty awesome return on $4,500 at the running back position.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, anybody else that we missed down here in this range?
God, man, we talked about almost everyone down here. I think I'm feeling pretty good with the names we talked about. Yeah.
The only other guy I guess I wanted to just quickly bring up would be Duke Johnson. I mean, I do think that there's something there. Obviously, he seems like the most talented guy on that offense. That's not really that useful to be the best guy on Cleveland's offense is not really a ringing endorsement, but it is nonetheless, you know, it means that he should get some work. Do either of you guys have any positive vibes for Duke this week or no?
Steve, go ahead.
I mean, I'm really not feeling Duke that much. I know Jacksonville. There's been some thought that Jacksonville's just going to blow this game somehow to Cleveland, and Cleveland will somehow stay in it and eventually win and get their first win of the year. But I'm not feeling that at all. Jacksonville's defense in general, with like I said, the addition of Darius, they've been so dominant. Even though Duke has been great in the passing game and really a big factor there, I'm off him.
Yeah, so my thoughts on Duke I'm looking at his game log right now, and I'm pretty interested to see that he got 10 carries last week. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a game script thing, if that's because they were competitive in a game. And they've actually been pretty competitive most of the season. They've kept it close a lot more than people think. You know, he had 6 targets and 6 receptions last week and 10 carries, so 16 touches. That's pretty solid for a guy at 5,600. But his price went up this week, and that's something I really don't understand. Unless the DK algorithm still thinks that Jacksonville has a total, you know, dumpster fire rush defense, which they don't anymore. So the play here, if you're going to take Duke Johnson, is you're expecting that the passing game for Cleveland gets reeled in a bit because of the weather, and that they're playing from behind a little bit, and that he's getting, let's say, instead of 6 targets, he gets 10 targets. If he gets 10 targets, I think that more than justifies the price. But if he's only going to get 6, and let's say 6 to 8 carries, at 5,600, I'm out on that. I'd rather have Doug Martin. There's 5 or 6 other players cheaper than that I'd rather have in that situation.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. Yeah, if there's nobody else left at running back, we can shoot over to wide receiver. I, for one, we mentioned it already, I am fully in on Mike Evans this week. I think there's a reasonable chance that he sees, 13, 14 targets. Would be almost my conservative median projection for him this week. I think Fitzpatrick is just not going to give a shit, not look at anybody else the entire game. So are we locking him into cash, Josh, or do you think that we need to pay down a little bit? What are we doing here?
No, I think if you're going to pay for the elite wide receiver on the slate, it's Evans. I don't have any problem with that. I'll probably have him in a couple of my cash lineups this week just because of all the reasons you mentioned. He's a target hog. And I think that if they're going to pass in this offense this week, I think it's going to be to him. I'm pretty sure he's going to be pissed off after his suspension last week and be ready to go light up Miami. And we saw Devin Funchess just totally destroy them last week. And it was some really unconventional stuff too, like a wide receiver screen, which they really don't throw to Evans all that much. And then just a regular conventional route that they threw behind the DB and let Funchess come back to it. Evans can do that. So I think if you're expecting 12 to 15 targets for Evans, even if it's a little bit of a competitive game, right? If Miami somehow manages to claw their way into this thing, I think Evans is a total smash play here, especially for cash.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be extremely safe. Of course, now that I'm saying that, it's definitely gonna go the other way, and he's gonna end up with like 6.3 points. But that's just how everything's been rolling in cash for me lately. Steve, are you in on Evans?
Yeah, totally in on Evans. Like the exact same points that you both have made. Like there's no reason for him not to get double-digit targets in this game against a terrible Miami team. Like Miami is just an awful, awful team. One of the worst in DVOA, not only in the pass but against the run as well. So I'm totally in on Evans.
Yeah, I mean Miami's I just pulled it up. They've let their opponent beat their implied total 5 games this year already, and that's pretty putrid. So, but we're gonna get to a couple of defenses who are even worse than that. So, if we stay above 7K, we have Michael Thomas, Adam Thielen, Tyreek Hill, and AJ Green. I am a noted Ty Fraud Hill.
You hate him so much.
I hate him with every fiber of my being, but he is on the road, which has been insane splits that he's had this year. On the road. I think he's averaging like 19 points on the road and like 8 at home or something ridiculous. It's like all single digit games at home for him. So because he's a fraud, but against the Giants, I mean, I think I could probably go for like, I don't know, 5 for 75 and a touchdown against the Giants at this point. So, and that's just me, and I'm out of shape if you've been following along on Twitter. So, so Tyreek Hill is just automatic, right? Josh, you gotta.
Yeah,
you gotta
so.
do it.
I'm digging through my tweets because I tweeted this out yesterday. I went and looked at his home road split, and I'm running through here. So, hey, Steve, can you vamp for me for a couple minutes about Tyreek Hill while I find these numbers?
Of course, man, because Matt and I had quite the discussion preseason about Tyreek Hill. Like we could go back in the archives and talk about our side of the argument about Tyreek Hill. So, but yeah, no, I'm loving him this week. Like, can't you just see Tyreek Hill just showing up like Marquise Goodwin last week and just catching like an 80-yard bomb from Alex Smith, just burning the Giants deep, or catching a wide receiver screen like Robert Woods a couple weeks ago and just taking it to the house. Like I could see both those things happening relatively easily in this game, just because the Giants don't care anymore. Like they just do not give a shit about playing defense anymore in the NFL. So, you about Hill 7,100 this week. I think he's a great play.
I think Hill could be Hill could pull another. What were people calling it? The Screen Mary from the other week. He could do that against the Giants because the Giants will just be like walking to the locker room with 5 seconds left on the clock because they're just completely done.
Flipping double birds to McAdoo on their way.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
And his dumb slick back hair. He's such an idiot. I fucking hate him so much. He's the worst. He's the absolute worst.
I found my Hill splits that I tweeted out yesterday, and it's really stark. I didn't think about the splits until Evan Silva mentioned it on Twitter yesterday, and I was like, I really got to go look at this because he didn't have any numbers. Just go look at it, dude. He's magic on the road. And it's crazy. Like on his road split, and I went all the way back to 2016 when he kind of became prominent in the offense mid-season. And from mid-season 2016 on, so it looks like he's played 9 road games. And in those road games, he's 5 touchdowns and one interception targeted his way. His racer, which is his receiver air conversion rate. So it's basically receiving yards over air yards, is 1.03, which for a wide receiver is phenomenal, especially when you consider that his ADOT is 9.8. So he's converting his air yards into very good receiving yards. And then on top of that, let's see, he's gotten 70 targets on the road and caught 53 of those. So let's go back and look at his home split. His home split, he's only had 49 targets. So we're talking about a 21 target difference in the same number of games, both at home and on the road, 9 games. And that's such a stark contrast. You think a guy's going to get, let's say, 8 targets a game on the road, and you're thinking really hard about playing a guy like that, because that's a pretty hefty target volume for a guy in an offense if you're going to get 8+ a game. So I'll think about him pretty hard. And then on top of that, there's the gravy of him being the return guy from time to time. And if he takes a punt and houses it on DraftKings, you get those points, right? I think, pretty sure.
Yep.
And so I haven't hit any of those this year, so that's probably why my memory's foggy. But if Tyreek Hill houses a punt return or something like that, then there's the gravy, and that kind of, I think, to me, that makes it worthwhile to play him, considering the road split, considering the opponent, and then considering the return game that he gets a little bit of a piece of.
Yeah, and it's like Steve said, it's going to be ugly. It's I have a very bad feeling about having to watch this game, but of course I'll do it to myself. But
but we said that last week about Detroit and Cleveland, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a dogfight the whole way through. So the thing is, like, the Giants, they hate McAdoo so much. Yeah, and you could see it in their demeanor. They hate that guy, except for maybe Evan Ingram, who's the only one, and Sterling Shepard, the only guys going out there and earning their paychecks and that look like they give a damn. But these guys, they still have pride. They're professional players, and I think no matter how much they hate their coach, they're going to go out and for the most part, they're going to give, let's say, 90%, probably. And 90% out of a pro team is probably good enough to win in a lot of situations. And we've seen Kansas City lay eggs before, right? So I think there's more than a reasonable probability that the Kansas City comes out and they're flat, and the Giants come out and they play a reasonable game and keep it competitive, and maybe that keeps Tyreek Hill, his numbers, depressed a little bit. So I think there's arguments to be made for fading this game from the Kansas City side, because it seems like it's such an easy, like, free space from all positions that it may make sense to just fade it and get somewhere else and look at something else this week.
Yeah, I think I can tell myself so many stories about this game, like them coming off the bye scares me, but then it's like, it's the Giants, so maybe they're not going to get up for it. Like, there's so many different ways to go with this game. I think it would take quite a set to just completely fade Kansas City in general this week. But hey, we've seen stranger things happen. So as we stay up in that range, though, I'm a little bit interested in Michael Thomas. Steve, do you have any Thomas love?
Yeah, we've seen him get the volume the last couple of weeks, so that hasn't been the issue. He just hasn't fallen into the end zone. So there is some touchdown regression to what we think for that passing game. They've actually run for more touchdowns than I think they've thrown for this year too, which is really weird, and especially in a Drew Brees offense. But even though he's $500 cheaper than Evans, I still think I would go Evans over Thomas. But I do think Thomas is certainly viable as a GPP play to have quite a few shares of him. And you could even stack him with some other skilled players in that Saints offense if you're going to fade Ingram. So, yeah, I think Thomas is viable, just not my favorite from this upper echelon of receivers.
And then we have Thielen and Green. So are you feeling any of those guys, Steve?
Thielen's price has just gotten a little bit too out of control for me.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, like he's obviously coming off a monster week last week. You can't expect that again, especially in a tougher matchup against the Rams. So I would not be playing Thielen. AJ Green, of course, we saw him catch that monster deep ball. Really rough matchup here, probably up against Aqib Talib and Denver in Denver. So I don't think I'll have much AJ Green either.
Josh, how about you up here?
Yeah, so for me, Michael Thomas is a cash play almost every week, and that's because of his floor. He hasn't scored but 2 touchdowns this year, and they were pretty early in the season. Last week, he rolled out, 9 for 117. He was like 23 or 24 DraftKings points. And I had him in my cash lineups all last week because the floor has been there the whole season, except for one game where they were that was against Detroit when they were up by like 35 points. So if he's even in a competitive game, he's going to be used quite a bit. And here's the other thing. It's like, well, folks will say, well, Josh Norman's going to shadow him. That's not true. No. So Norman doesn't shadow, number one. Number two, Michael Thomas is good enough to beat him. Number three, his coach is good enough to scheme him away if he needs to. And he's got Drew Brees as his quarterback. So I still think Michael Thomas is a super high floor play, certainly worth worth cash consideration if you don't want to play Evans or if you don't want to play Thielen or Hill. So I'll probably have him in cash again this week, at least in one of my lineups. Thielen, I really like. He's a slot guy, and we've seen him when Diggs is on the field, Thielen eats. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, yeah, his price has got up above Diggs, which is pretty crazy. But that's just because he's eating thanks to Diggs. And this is kind of like Roger Maris hitting 61 home runs because Mickey Mantle batted behind him. It's that kind of deal, right? So, these guys feed off each other. And maybe it's Diggs' week to score the touchdowns, but I still think that if we consider that the Rams and the Vikings get up into the upper 20s or even into the 30s, Thielen's going to have a huge game. It has to happen, right? If it's not a touchdown, it's at least yardage and receptions. So I think Thielen has to be a cash consideration. I think he's certainly worthy of attorney consideration this week, even though there's probably going to be a lot of ownership that drifts over to him versus Diggs after the game last week. And then lastly, on A.J. Green, I think A.J. Green is worth attorney play. And I say this because his ownership will be minuscule, infinitesimal almost, probably because of his matchup and because of the perception that the Bengals are absolute garbage. They are, but Des Bryant scored against this defense. He's a wide receiver 1. And we've seen some other wide receiver 1s get over on this defense this year. So they don't appear to have quite the teeth against wide receiver 1s that they typically do. So I think Green is worth a little bit of a percentage here, just because we know that if Cincinnati gets behind, they're going to throw him the ball. They'll force it. And it's kind of like the Nuke Hopkins principle, right? If we know that A.J. Green is probably going to get, let's say, 12 targets, I think you have to at least think about him in a tournament lineup.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with the price drop, he's right at 7K. I think that, if you ever listen or go through like Fantasy Labs trends and stuff, all these dropping salaries are the times that you want to buy guys, especially at low ownership, like you mentioned. So I will definitely have some exposure to AJ. As we get into the 6K range, though, I think there's interesting cases to be made sort of throughout this entire range. Steve, do you have any favorites in this range?
Yeah, like you said, tons of names here that could be viable. I mean, we'll start at the bottom with Robert Woods and Amari Cooper. I think Cooper's a great play here against New England secondary. I'll be intrigued to see which corner they match up against who in terms of either Stephon Gilmore or Butler, because Butler's got worked last week by Manny Sanders. Like, Manny Sanders just tore him a new asshole for the vast majority of that game. So I'll be really intrigued. That's true. You're right. No, you're totally right, man. He's just a nasty route runner. So I'll be intrigued to see if they put Gilmore or Butler on Cooper. So I think he's certainly viable. Sterling Shepard coming off a monster game with the Giants at 6,300. The target floor there, I think, is at least 10 for him this week in an effort coming from behind. What we think is going to be an effort coming from behind. So I think he's got a really safe floor at 63. I'm really liking Brandon Cooks as well at 66. Just the difference in speed, and we saw this when he was a New Orleans Saint, of him being able to get behind an Oakland Raider defense and burning them over the top. So I really think that he's viable as well at 66. And then what's not to love about Stephon Diggs at 67, kind of pivoting off Thielen there, who should have that higher ownership. I think Diggs at the discounted price of 6,700 versus Thielen 72. He's at least as good of a player as Thielen is, and I think definitely worth some consideration.
How about you, Josh, with these 6K guys?
Yeah, I mean, the more I look at this, I'm going to have a lot of trouble building lineups this week because I see so many plays that I like versus when I glanced at this on Monday, I was like, not so much. But now I'm telling myself so many stories. I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play this week just because I'm not going to be able to make a decision. So, Steve mentioned a lot of good stuff about these guys, and I'm kind of have a lot of the same thoughts on them. I think Cooks is going to end up being chalk because I hear Cooks talked about a lot this week. I don't know what his fan share is right now, but I would imagine it's pretty high just because of the Oakland defense being perceived as a kind of a gateway for wide receiver scoring. And with Hogan being out, it's like, well, Cooks is the only way they can score wide receiver points. And I have a take on that I don't think that's true necessarily, and we'll get on that when we hit tight end. But I think that Cooks is a good play. I don't think I would get very overweight on him just because I think the field will be overweight on him. I think Diggs is great just because of the reasons we talked about with Thielen. I do like Jarvis Landry. I think Jarvis Landry is certainly worth a cash look this week because of how bad the Tampa defense is. And if we think that Miami's going to be playing catch up again, then Landry's, looking at probably 10 catches for 65 yards, and he might get another score again this week. So I like him for that reason. Cooper, again, it depends on the coverage, right? If he gets Butler, I think Cooper can eat. I think they're actually going to do it the other way around. I think they're going to I think that's how it's going to work out. I think they will end up putting Butler on Cooper and adding help, and then letting Gilmore run with Crabtree, who's the better route runner, the better technical receiver. And they could probably just, they'll throw resources at Cooper and let Gilmore handle Crabtree. Other guys in the 6K range, I'm wondering if people will chase Robert Woods this week. I do think that he has some worthiness maybe in a tourney lineup. If we find out that Xavier Rhodes is going to be following him around, which I think will be the case, then I will be off of him. And you might look at Cooper Kupp, and we could talk about him in a minute as a pivot if you think that game's going to go bonkers. Otherwise, in that range, I'm probably going to fade Shepard, even though I think he's going to be chalky this week again. And Nuke Hopkins is, I think he's like AJ Green. I think he's a tourney play, a high target, low efficiency, hope for a touchdown or two kind of play.
Yeah, and you mentioned Cooks. His fan share tags right now, he's at like a third of Sterling Shepard right now. So it doesn't look like he's completely, I mean, again, this is Thursday night. Things can obviously change. He can catch up. But as things stand right now, he's about a third as tagged as Shepard, and he's behind Parker, Landry, Hopkins, Woods, Cooper in this range. So it looks like he might see a little bit lower ownership than I guess I was sort of anticipating. But I'm fully in on Cooks for sure. I think if you're going to tell yourself that Kansas City is going to get ahead, you have to be in on Shepard to a certain extent, especially in tournaments. I think he's shown, obviously, like last week with the game that he had, that he can put together a pretty decent game. So yeah, I'm kind of in on that, and you can rotate a little bit of exposure here and there to the rest of the guys, but for me, I'm gonna try to take some stands this week because I think ownership will be pretty spread out. So hopefully that works out for me, but it fucking probably won't because I saw it. So what's the difference, right?
Hey, come on, have some faith. Faith.
Just making some donations here in the middle of the season. Got to.
You can't get you kicked in the nuts 11 weeks in a row, right?
No, and this was like I was running way too pure with my cash lineup for the first like 7 weeks of the season that I knew it was going to turn around, and I was ill prepared. But as we keep going down, you mentioned Cooper Kupp. Why don't we start there, Josh? What are your thoughts on Kupp this week?
Yeah, so I mean, it's you want to get away from Xavier Rhodes when you play the Vikings, right? So if we think that Woods is going to be the focus of Rhodes, which I think that's going to be the case, then Kupp's the guy you want to look at probably as your target beneficiary outside of Gurley. So I mean, people say, yeah, well, maybe they'll actually give Watkins more than 2 targets in a game this week, and I guess that's possible, but that should have happened already if it was going to happen. So if it hadn't happened already, I don't see a reason for it to happen this week. Maybe they double his target load and give him 4. Okay, great. So he's got to bust a long touchdown to make that work. So in that case, I'm going to go and look back at Kupp, and I looked at Kupp's target volume earlier today just because I was thinking about him, dreaming about him, and he's getting pretty good target volume even in their heavy, their heavily positive game script games. When they're ahead by 2-3 touchdowns, he's still getting targets, right? So if we think this is a competitive game and they're going to have to throw to stay in the game, then why not? I mean, he's certainly worth a look in tournaments. Sprinkle your ownership in there, right? Because he hasn't scored a lot this year, but he could get in the box and he could, let's say, have like an 8 for 80 game with a touchdown, and that's more than reasonable at his price.
Definitely. How about you, Steve? What are your thoughts in this sort of like 6K and below range?
Yeah, I'm starting to fall in love with Jamison Crowder more and more. I know he dropped a couple balls last week, but the volume is there over the last 2 games. And playing against New Orleans, he should be away from Marshawn Lattimore, which will be a big help to his game running out of the slot. So I really expect him to bounce back this week indoors, in the Superdome. So I'm really excited for him to kind of ball out this week at 4,300. I think he's a really viable play. Some other plays in this range. I actually kind of like Jeremy Maclin. I know the volume hasn't been there really a lot this year, but going up against Green Bay, who's been kind of a sieve to wide receiver production, I'm actually kind of a fan. He's actually had a penchant for scoring as well. At only 4,500. I could easily see a game where he gets about 7 targets, catches 5 of them for about 60 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I'm a little hesitant in this like 5K range. I think that this is sort of going to be a little bit of a dead range, even for ownership. Looking at FanShare, it seems like Marvin Jones is getting talked about a little bit, but sentiment is kind of mixed on him. But Lee looks like he could see some ownership. Josh, are you trusting Bortles at all, or?
The weather's concerning right now. I think Jacksonville is purely a tournament play at this point, because if the weather does look pretty bleak on Sunday in Cleveland, if they are supposed to have the high winds that are predicted at this point, they're not cash viable at that situation. I think that what we'll have to do then is just sprinkle them into tournament lineups, because we know that guys do blow up in those type of games. Holy cow, Rashard Matthews just scored a touchdown. Awesome. Sorry. I love that dude. He's a G. Anyway, so, Marquise Lee, I think he's worth the play just because of his floor. But if the wind's up, I'm going to avoid that game altogether more than likely, except for, maybe a little bit of Fournette just because of the wind. Someone in that price range, and you just mentioned Marvin Jones. I love Marvin Jones this week. And, to me, it's kind of like we're weighing back and forth between Golden Tate and Marvin Jones. So, Marvin Jones ate for a few weeks, and then last week it was Golden Tate's turn. Mm-hmm. So why can't it be Marvin Jones' week again this week? He's been targeted pretty heavily in the red zone. If we think that Detroit's going to put up some points against Chicago, let's say they get into the 20s, I think Marvin Jones is certainly worth a look as a guy that can get in the box this week, maybe once or twice. I don't think Detroit will be able to run all that well, and that's one reason why I do like Riddick this week, is because they will pass to the running back. And they are pretty pass heavy these days because they've been so bad at running. So I do like Marvin Jones this week. And someone else I was looking at in this 5K range, actually 2 guys, are the Denver receivers. Because, Steve, you talked about it a minute ago. Manny Sanders is a stud, and he ate last week against the Patriots. Mm-hmm. So now he gets to play what's perceived as probably a tough matchup against Cincinnati, even though they're at home. And, why can't he take those guys to class too? So I think that Manny Sanders is certainly worth a look. He's super cheap this week for me, in my opinion, at 5,200. And that's a guy I think is cash viable this week, even though it's a low total game. I do think that Denver will come out and try to throw the ball. And even a low total game, I think he can score enough to warrant his price.
Yeah, definitely. Steve, do you have any other in this mid range? Because I have a dumpster dive that we need to talk about as well.
Yeah, I echo the Manny Sanders just because I love the way the guy plays the game, man. Just total competitor, awesome route runner, just tough as nails. When you total opposite of Demaryius Thomas, who short arms almost every ball. So that's why I will continue to spread the Manny Sanders love. But yeah, man, go dumpster diving. Let me hear what you have.
Everybody's talking about Ellington, right? Fuller's going to miss.
Bruce.
So I don't know. 3K, he's going to be highly owned. So I think probably fading him in tournaments makes some sense. But I think, I will definitely have him in my cash lineup just as an insulation against that ownership. And I think it makes a little bit of sense, right? You're attacking away from Patrick Peterson on a pass defense that really hasn't rated out that well overall. It's really just Peterson, and that's it. So I think that makes some sense this week. That's kind of it. don't get cute with D.D. Westbrook. Like, it's especially with the weather. Like, just don't do it. It's not worth it. Wait a week, see what happens. See if he even, like, I don't know, gets like 3 targets. Like, that would be nice to see before you start like betting your down payment on fucking D.D. Westbrook. Like, I think patience is a good tactic this week on him. Outside of that, I mean, I'm gonna, like I mentioned before, I'm really just trying to take some stands on some guys, and just sort of really zeroing in ownership and hoping that my core hits this week at wide receiver, because I think I'd rather screw around a little bit with running backs and tight ends, because I think ownership is going to be so concentrated. So why don't we shoot over there to tight ends, and we can start up at the top with Travis Kelce, who could legitimately have like 250 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns this week. Like,
at least that's his floor.
No, what we need to do is we need to predict how many dances Kelce is going to do this week, because every time he gets in the box, he has something sweet for the fans to watch, right? So how many dances has he got for us this week?
I think a fair line is like over under 2.5.
Damn, that's a lot, dude.
I would be shocked if he doesn't have 2 touchdowns this week.
Golly,
like, I really would. Yeah. I think it's going to be a complete. All that being said, I think I'm still going to fade him in tournaments, because I think I'd rather pay up in a couple other spots, and I think playing Gronk makes a ton of sense too. But what are your guys' thoughts on Kelce this week, Josh? I guess we'll start with you.
Okay, so yeah, for me, Kelce, he's a cash play for me. Just for all the reasons you mentioned, but and we kind of talked about this earlier. Like, the sure thing is never the sure thing in the NFL.
Right.
So I mean, to me, I think that there's a fear of loss, right? If I play Kelce and he lays an egg on me at 7,300, then what, right? Then my roster is probably totally hosed for the week, because I'm replacing an elite wide receiver with a Travis Kelce, and he totally effed me. So, but still, I think you got to play him. If you're going to pay up anywhere, I think tight end's the place to do it this week. I'm going to have a roster build that has Kelce and Gronk in it.
Love it.
For cash, because I think they offer so much more upside than a lot of the wide receivers in their price range and even below their price range, that both of those guys could go out and get 30 points this week, in my opinion. Yeah. Both of them could get in the box twice. Both of them could have 100+ yards receiving. Both of them could have 8+ catches. So I want that on my cash roster. I think it's certainly a tourney play. Folks are going to probably try to drop down to Evan Ingram a little bit at 6K, even though I think he's super expensive now. But his volume in their offense, I mean, he's basically Travis Kelce for them. So it's certainly worth a look. And then I won't get down to the lower price yet, because I know we're gonna get some more on them. So I'll let Steve opine about Travis Kelce a little bit.
Yeah, man, no, totally love your call on that. I mean, I think both he and Gronk are just totally great plays. The over/under, though, Matt, geez, 2.5. I was hoping you were going to say 1.5, because I would have taken the over. I think he's.
Yeah, I thought 1.5 was a good number. 2.5 is like that's the self-loathing Giants fan.
Right.
You have to understand where that's coming from. Like, any objective person would never say that, but I am so disgusted with the Giants. Like, I'm wearing a Mets sweatshirt right now because I hate that's how bad the Giants have gone in the other direction, that I'm like, hey, maybe the Mets will be good this year, because the Giants fucking suck.
Dude, it's ugly, man. It really is ugly. Watching that team every week just makes me want to pull my hair out. But yeah,
I tell you, man, though, the Giants are a coach away. That's it. I mean, they're Kansas City right before they got Andy Reid. If they get the right coach in place, that team could win 12 games next season.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it. We saw it last year. It was 11. They won 11-5. But I mean, yeah, McAdoo's totally lost the locker room after the OBJ thing, and just they're a mess. Totally agree with you, though. One coach away from being back in the playoffs. But yeah, totally agree on Kelce. Gronk again in an awesome spot. Ingram for 6K, like, his usage is so great, and he's been the red zone target for them as well. So he's definitely in play if you're going to drop down just a bit there. Then underneath that, I mean, I think Jordan Reed might not play again. So whenever Reed is out, Vernon Davis just seems to eat. Like he just keeps getting fed targets over the middle of the field. So for 46, if you're dropping down a bit lower and want to kind of save a little bit, Vernon Davis for 4,600, if we're sure Reed isn't playing, I think is a viable play as well.
Yeah, I think I guess I kind of want your guys' thoughts on this too. It's another sort of, guy who burned everybody last week in Cam Brate, but I mean the matchup's there for him. I don't know. Is there any reason for optimism with Brate this week, Josh, or is that an avoid for you?
No, it's like I guess I'm poster boy for Brate last week on Twitter because I went so hard to the wall for him, and I'll do it again this week. He's in a freaking catbird spot this week again against Miami, and Tampa Bay's been so good about getting the tight end involved in their offense that it's really hard to fade that. Now, some of the shine may come off of that because Mike Evans is coming back. I think that was a lot of reason to look at Brate last week as a guy that'd be a beneficiary of Evans being out. So Evans coming back and pairing that with the fact that Brate only played 46% of the snaps last week, I think there's some concern about his role in the offense maybe changing a little bit. So I think those two things together, and combined with the fact that he burned so many people last week, I think he's going to be an awesome tourney play because you'll have a lot of leverage on the field. Cash play, I'll probably avoid it because there's so many guys around him, I think, that are in better situations from a game script standpoint that I'd rather play. But I don't have any problem with people playing Brate this week. He's in a great spot, but I think there are better spots around him.
Yeah, and I think we should definitely mention Tyler Kroft as well. Mm-hmm. He is definitely shaking out to be pretty chalky this week. If people are going to just completely pay down at tight end, he only has two fewer start tags than Kelsey right now. So that's interesting. I think if Kelsey ends up going a little bit less owned than we think, if people get a little gun shy when they're building lineups for paying $7,300 for a tight end, I think that it could be an excellent week for me because I will definitely be overweight. Tight end is so variant. Are there any other dart throws for you, Steve, at tight end this week?
I guess we have to put our requisite Mercedes Lewis call in there too for 27, like against Cleveland, who's again terrible against tight end. It's a GPP play. It's not a cash play for 2,700, I don't think. But yeah, you can throw him into a lineup or two just for that TD upside against a putrid Cleveland secondary, especially against like Jabril Peppers, for as exciting as he was coming out of college, has been equally as bad in the NFL so far.
Hey, now some of that because they play him 25 yards off the line of scrimmage every week, or is it just because he's bad?
I think right now it's a combination of both. Like his role is totally different than he was at Michigan, where he was like an in-the-box safety or / third linebacker. So yeah, totally different role. He's still learning the game, I'm sure, but yeah.
Anybody else for you, Josh, at tight end?
There's a ton of guys here. And this comes back to me like once I've worked into the receivers and now in the tight ends, like I don't know if I'm going to be able to build a lineup this week just because this indecision is going to rule. So Jared Cook, to me, is a smash play just because he's really being used like a wide receiver in the offense. He's getting a ton of targets. He's running a ton of routes. And if we think the game script's going to favor passing game for Oakland, Cook makes a ton of sense. I mean, he totally smoked Miami last week or a couple weeks back. And so I think we have to look at him at 4,800 pretty seriously, even for cash. Especially if you want to run a two tight end set in your lineup and you don't necessarily want to pay up for Gronk and Kelsey in the same squad. Right. I think Rudolph has a lot of value this week as maybe a pivot if you don't want to play any of the wide receivers in Minnesota. We already mentioned Big Burn. I think Fedorowicz has some value this week. And that's because I think in tournament plays, he's going to be worth a pivot off of Ellington. I think Ellington's going to be in a ton of tournament lineups just because of his price. I think that Fedorowicz at $500 less, or sorry, $100 more, got that wrong, but $100 more is worth a look because Fedorowicz was very, very productive in his role before he got hurt. Last year, he's very productive as tight end. And if we think that we can target the guy that's not with Peterson. Fedorowicz could get those targets just as easily as Ellington can. Gresham, I think Gresham is worth a look this week, especially if Gabbert starts. If he's going to be targeting guys in the middle, closer to the line of scrimmage, that's Gresham. I mean, Gresham scored 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. So I think Gresham is worth a look at 2,800. And then probably last for me, if I'm kicking bottom of the barrel, is going to be Ben Watson at 2,800 as well, because the tight end has done well against Green Bay this season. And we have seen that Baltimore has a propensity to throw to the tight end. We talked about Macklin already. I think Watson may be worth a look as a tourney play as well.
Yeah, those all sound good to me. Like I said, tight end is so crazy that, I mean, any of these guys can end up as the tight end one on any given week. So it's definitely worth taking some shots, especially when ownership is going to be so concentrated on really, like, it seems like 3 guys for the most part. So definitely something to consider. Steve, why don't you hit me with your favorite defense before we hit some stacks and get out of here?
Yeah, I think Josh brought him up before. Chargers this week, man. Playing against a banged-up offensive line in Buffalo, a team that just seems to have lost their way. Rookie quarterback who we're not sure what we're going to get out of him. And the combination of Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, just the sack masters on the outside. So I really like the Chargers this week.
How about you, Josh?
Yeah, for me, for cash, it's going to be Chargers. In a tournament lineup, I'm going to look at the Cleveland Browns if the wind sucks in Cleveland that day, because we know they're a very stout run defense. And if we think there's going to be some questionable passing offense in that game, I think Cleveland's worth a look as a team that maybe could get a couple of turnovers, maybe house one of them, and kind of keep the score low against Jacksonville. Maybe Jacksonville shows up flat, right? And they just suck ass, and Cleveland, maybe they end up winning this game. I think this is a winnable game for Cleveland, even without the wind, right? Even if the wind doesn't kick up. And another team I'd look at maybe as a YOLO play tournament defense is going to be Tampa Bay with Miami. We know Jay Cutler will turn the ball over, right? And if we think that Tampa has a pretty positive game script in that game, it does make some sense maybe to have a little bit of a percentage of Tampa Bay, like we did, some folks did last week against New York Jets, in your tournament lineups.
Yeah, and I mean, if you mentioned Dougie Martin before, so why not stack those guys up too?
That stack will be so low owned, low owned. You have so much leverage on the field.
Absolutely. So that's a nice little segue. I agree on defense. I'm the worst at defense, so I'm not even gonna pretend to know what's going on. I'm just I'm hopeless at defense. So why don't you hit me with a couple of your favorite stacks, Josh, and then we'll go to Steve, and I'll close this out, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, so stacks I'm looking at this week are I'm looking at Breeze and Thomas. If that game is offensive in any way, like Minnesota and Washington was last week, then if the Saints have to throw, I like Breeze, I like Thomas. I think that's a low percentage or low ownership percentage play. I like Alex Smith paired with Kelsey. Even though Alex Smith typically doesn't have that high of a ceiling, if this game gets a little bit offensive and let's say, maybe KC struggles to run the ball a bit, or maybe Andy Reid's got some really cool stuff schemed up after a bye week, I think Alex Smith could have a lot of value here. The other one I'll be looking at is Goff and Gurley paired up, just because if Goff is going to throw the ball and Gurley's going to be a beneficiary because he's trying to get away from someone like Xavier Rhodes, and we also think Gurley is a 30-touch guy, I think there's some value in stacking those two players. And then lastly for me, I'm looking at, where did it go? Oh, Brady and Gronk. That, to me, that's a slam dunk, right? As a stack. It's a high price stack, but that's going to give you a lot of leverage on the field, in my opinion, in tournaments, because you're looking at investing, almost 15 grand in those two. And it's a big chunk of your lineup, but I think it's certainly worth the look.
Definitely. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, I think the opposite side of that game is real interesting too, with Carr and then with Cooper and Crabtree. I think that could even be a viable triple on that one, just because we think the target concentrations is so high in both those players. So Carr with Crabtree and Cooper, I think, is viable. Again, kind of going to that triple stack as well with the Chiefs. I know you talked about Smith and Kelsey. I would definitely feel free to add in Tyreek Hill in that as well, and triple stack that game with the major pass catchers against that Giants secondary. Let's see what else. A little bit, definitely going to be a little bit lower owned. Fitzmagic and Mike Evans. So kind of the opposite side of your thoughts with Martin and the Tampa defense. If Fitz finds that magic from a couple years ago, he did have that 6 touchdown game. Like if he can figure that out with Mike Evans, that could be real interesting. Definitely going to be a little bit lower owned there. I think those are kind of my big 3 that I'm going to be circling around with.
I'm going to throw another one at you that just came up, and it's something I thought about earlier this week, and I missed it earlier. But Gabbert and Fitzgerald. Mm. So if we want to play cheap quarterback and pair him up with somebody, I think Fitzgerald is probably going to see 15 targets this week. I mean, he's going to be Arizona's version of Hopkins. And if we think he's going to see that many targets, and he has a few times this season already, then he's got a super high floor paired with Gabbert, who we think is a pretty high floor streaming type quarterback, and that might give you a relatively low priced, high upside stack, especially for tournaments, that it's probably going to be pretty low owned just because of the perception of the Arizona offense.
Absolutely. Something that sort of jumped out to me too would be Goff to Kupp and running it back with either of the receivers in Minnesota, or even Rudolph. To a certain extent, I think I sort of like targeting not like the very highest obvious game totals. I kind of like going for like that 3rd or 4th highest, and that kind of fits in there. I'll have to have the Kansas City stack, because if I don't, and I'm watching how bad the Giants are playing and that Kansas City is just going off, I'm gonna break the TV probably. So
you're hedging on your fandom. I like that.
Yeah. Always. I will never ever play Eli, and I will always be playing against the Giants, even when they're good. I do that. So, although that seems like a distant memory at this point. But yeah, I think that's probably my favorite out of sort of the ones that you guys didn't mention. Again, just this is going to be an interesting week. So definitely make sure that you're following along with news this week and paying attention as we get closer to kickoff, because if anything happens, it could completely shake up the slate. And I think ownership is going to be pretty spread out this week. With the exception of a couple of plays. So definitely make sure that you are following us on Twitter. Josh is at Fantasy ADHD. And obviously you can take a look at his website as well. If you read my articles, you see the graphics and visuals that he pumps out every week on his site. So thank you for that, Josh. And thanks for coming on with us tonight, man. It was a blast.
That was a lot of fun. I appreciate you using the stuff from the site in your articles. It's and that's the intent, right? It's that I don't create content. I give others the ability to create content. That's my goal. I make tools. I want people to use the tools so they can get smarter, make better decisions, because that's why I made them in the first place, so I can make better decisions. So if I can make better decisions, then hopefully everybody else can, and we can all win a little bit of money.
That's the plan, man. And yeah, thank you for seriously, thank you for all that you do, because it's a huge time save for me. It's very similar to like Fantasy National, what they do for golf. I think you and Josh Hermsmeyer do the same thing for football for me. Just save me so much time without me having to figure out how to actually be smart about this stuff. And I can just reap all the rewards from your hard work. So thank you for that, man. I really appreciate that. And my wife appreciates that, because my process is a lot shorter now.
That's the important part, right? The wife's got to buy in.
Absolutely. Happy wife, happy life, man.
Amen.
And Steve, thanks for hopping on again. You can find him on Twitter at @TheRealHalupka. And little programming note, we'll probably be recording Tuesday next week, me and Steve. So we can get it in before we gorge ourselves on turkey and stuffing next week.
Damn right.
So thanks again for listening, guys. Good luck this week. As always, you can check out bogeyfreedfs.com for the articles. You can subscribe here on YouTube or on iTunes for the podcast. And good luck this week, guys. See you.